Hello, and welcome to this Payments Journal hosted webinar entitled How Digital Acceleration Will Affect the Payments Industry. I am your host, Ryan Mack, and I'd like to address a few housekeeping items before we announce today's guest speakers. First, a recording of this presentation can be made available upon request after this presentation has concluded. Second, we will be having a Q&A section of this presentation, and we encourage you to submit your questions at any time. If we're not able to get to your questions at the end of this presentation, we will make sure that we follow up with you via email. Now let's get to today's guest speakers. First, we have Sankar Krishnan, who is the Executive Vice President at Capgemini. Next, we have Absalam Alawi, who is the CEO at HPS. And lastly, we have Tim Sloan, who is the VP of Payments Innovation at Mercator Advisory Group. So, Absalam, Sankar, Tim, thank you so much for joining me on today's webinar. I certainly think this is going to be a fantastic fireside chat where I think a lot of individuals certainly have a lot of questions in looking at kind of the year of 2020 and now kind of looking at 2021 and kind of some of the lessons learned. And I hopefully, you know, that's a lot of the things we're going to be pulling out on today's webinar. So, Absalam, the first question I want to direct to you first here. So, from your point of view at HPS, what are some of the lessons that you've learned from 2020 and the pandemic?
So for us, the first lesson really is that our relationship with our customers became virtual. Historically, we have always been in a model where we delivered locally our services and assistance, and suddenly we could not anymore travel. So we had to find ways, we had to reorganize, transform our operations, transform our models to be totally virtual. So the proximity that was physical became virtual thanks to the cloud. And as a matter of fact, we launched operations for global banks in two major countries. We are now launching operation on a third, not only country, but on another continent. We were able not only to deliver, but also to sell. And we continued supporting, delivering innovation to all our customers through latest technologies. So we have continued our innovation with this transformation due to or thanks to the cloud. So as a conclusion, we have been more close to our customers, and this has opened really new windows for us where we are able now to access markets that were not accessible physically, that are now accessible virtually. The second lesson that we have captured during this year is that cash is more than ever the enemy. So we witnessed a global focus on cash fighting, and even the most resistant bodies have been able or have appreciated the value of electronic payment and therefore adopted the electronic payment. Great innovation happened, and we have seen so nice and so valuable user experiences in the contactless, in the card net present. And we believe that we reached a tipping point on the electronic payment adoption, that there will be no more return possible. The third point that we have also witnessed is that we have seen more flexibility on national digital sovereignty. So we have seen in many geographies, people that, or organization, government that were very, very resistant to cloud technologies are now opening, and they have really seen the value. So these are the three really main lessons that we learned.
You know, it's fascinating. Recently, we've also seen that the pandemic has driven and made us more aware of class, at least in America. The critical workers that still have to go to work tend to be low and moderate income. And yet they also need to respond to the pandemic and have been adopting financial institutions that can work through the web now. So you see startups like Chime suddenly having a significant growth rate. And for merchants, it means that everybody is now going online to do their shopping. And so if they can increase their geographies, they can increase their market size and their revenue, because everybody's online, and physical location doesn't make any difference anymore as long as the merchants can handle it. And so you see this convergence of the pandemic driving behavior, moving people online, and merchants and others responding to that, as well as financial institutions. It's driven change so quickly, it's amazing.
Yeah, and much like what Absalam and Tim were saying, the main lesson that we learned, I mean, like everybody else, we are here to serve our customers. I mean, imagine a company like Capgemini, 250,000 people and so on, moving in work at home in like 48 hours and across 60, 65 countries. It was not an easy thing to do, especially with a lot of governments declaring cities and travel out of bounds. So lot of learnings in terms of how to work virtually, a lot of learning from a risk perspective, right? Because all the documentation that we have with our clients are not pandemic friendly. So we learned a lot in terms of what it should be, and hopefully coming out of the pandemic, we'll all make changes to that. Sustainability was big like never before, and obviously we are big believers in sustainability, but watching a lot of those images of planet Earth clean and blue without a lot of the pollution kind of makes one think. So we have really learned a lot in terms of how important sustainability is and made it a part of everyone's goals here at Capgemini. Also, health and wellness, and especially mental health. And we saw a lot of that come out during the pandemic. More importantly, from a payments perspective, we saw that a lot of the firms that were not agile kind of stutter, and a lot of the firms that have not built the capacity to service their clients in a virtual manner have trouble. So we had a role of being a calm hand that kind of lifted everybody else, because it was unlike no other pandemic. Even the Spanish flu was global, but initially it was only in parts of the world, and but this one is like affects everybody at the same time. So lots of lesson there, right?
Excellent.
Totally.
Yeah, I certainly think that that's absolutely fantastic. But now I think one of the major headlines of 2020 really here was, modernizing payments ecosystems here, right? I think that there were multiple headlines of you seeing organizations really rushing to modernize their payments ecosystem. But I'm curious though, what are really the focal points when we talk about modernizing payment ecosystems? And Absalom, if I could start with you for that question.
So as always, I think modernizing a payment ecosystem have to focus on the customer or on the user experience, and any successful modernization has to have the user experience in the center of it, and the user experience have to be simple, seamless, and secure. So by simple or the simplicity, sorry, will be coming obviously with less complexity. And this is achieved either through integrated or consolidated platforms or using composable technologies. So the system consolidation will bring less systems to manage, and therefore on-the-shelf features, state-of-the-art platforms, parameterization. Composable technologies will enable the consumption of external services and let systems to be built in a more composable way, and make sure that we are able to use the best in class in any of the services that would be needed to build that business. So the simplicity improves also the business agility. And this is very, very important, because this business agility will enable or will avoid to have a big waterfall programs, and enable more MVPs that will be very agile to implement, and also enable multiple iteration of that product to reach the perfection, or at least the customer need. I think also that a modernization or a successful modernization has to take into consideration or has to decrease the cost and the global TCOs. So this optimization of the cost has to happen to be able to activate or to run a proper modernization. And this is very, very important, because the existing legacy platforms could also be a lot or consuming a lot of resources. And also, talking about this modernization and the legacy, I think investing in the future, but keeping an eye on the future is a key issue or a key factor or key success factor, because we have seen investment that were done for today, but not only for tomorrow. So it has to be on a long term or at least medium term. And the last point for me that sometimes is also not really visible to our customers is that during this modernization, we have to be able to cope with the unpredictable. And we have had the experience last year that was really the top of what could happen. A lot of people that were, or a lot of organizations that were in the middle of very deep transformation that have consumed most of their energy were not able to extract themselves from those very heavy programs. So it has to be agile, it has to be composable, it has to also take into consideration mature platforms, because this maturity of the platforms do not go or can cope with the composable technology. It's not one or the other, it is often together.
Absolutely, and much like what Abdul Salam is saying, and obviously HPS has been really good at what they do. One of the things when we talk payment ecosystem is that obviously we have consumers on one hand, right? And the consumers are in different stages of being digital themselves. And Abdul Salam talked about how cash was, almost being replaced by contactless. But it was very interesting to see that in the early days of the pandemic, almost all the houses was storing some emergency funds, right? And coins had a very interesting aspect, and which was that typically when monetary and fiscal policy is done, 80% of coins circulate and only 20% of coins in everyday use are minted. But with the pandemic, the 80% of circulation did not happen. So there were a lot of grocers, merchants, machines, slot machines, what have you, saying how they cannot accept coins. And I mean, that was another way in which contactless was added to the mix. So the ecosystem side, there are consumers, digitally savvy and otherwise, that are on one hand. There are aggregators, and obviously consumers are all digital wallet, mobile wallet, contactless driven. And there are a lot of aggregators like ADN or Square or PayPal, depending on who you use. And then there are merchants, obviously, who are also affected by this pandemic. And obviously, they are trying to sell more, like an Amazon. And then there are basically issuers and there are acquirers. So how do we take this complex ecosystem that has its own rules traditionally working well, and now you switch everything into a pandemic situation where each of the players of the ecosystem have different expectations in terms of how they have to be served, right? And then obviously, as I was saying before, I mean, all of us have this responsibility to serve our customers. So it became a very tricky one during this pandemic. But the good thing to note is that we have seen a lot of the entire ecosystem come together in many ways, and things like fees being waived or things like fines being delayed and so on and so forth. I mean, tax payments is another big component, because obviously if you don't pay your taxes in time, at least in the US, you get hit with a lot of penalty. Even as we speak, a lot of the folks that have made those payments from their banks to the tax do not see it in their account, because the tax authorities themselves are responding to the IRS that is in a COVID in a certain way. At the same time, they are doing some transformation of their systems. So you cannot see the payments that you've made to the IRS in your own account. So there is some fear what happens if you don't see it on the other side. So a variety of these factors are at work, right? And we see that the entire ecosystem has really paved the way for a lot of modernization. There is still some chaos, but coming out of it on the other side, we are definitely going to see a more evolved payments ecosystem, a more transformed payments ecosystem, and a lot of them would benefit from the kind of work that Mercator or HPS do from a technology innovation and advisory perspective.
So many thoughts in so little time. That was a great overview of how the pandemic has impacted the entire ecosystem of suppliers. Right now, the U.S. is confronting the fact that they're unable to disperse to the low moderate income the $2,000, $600 benefits that have been awarded by Congress, because the low moderate income don't necessarily have bank accounts right now. And so they're having problems between getting checks delivered, getting prepaid cards delivered. They're just have hundreds of millions of dollars that they can't deliver, actually billions. And you flip that around and you say, well, APIs within the ecosystem enable third parties to partner up, and Mercator has seen a tremendous focus on API management platforms. But that doesn't necessarily make them composable, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're adopting microarchitecture methodologies or Kubernetes containers methods in the back end, which are all critical to the scalability and connectivity. So it's a fascinating time, and as we said it early on, this is all in a giant mix. There are some suppliers and merchants and banks that have moved very rapidly, and there are others that are just starting to catch up. But it's an opportunity for everybody.
Yeah. So to what Tim was saying, we have seen like never before a lot of assignments come our way in terms of what would be the end-to-end to implement contactless, for example, and what are the risks of implementing those contactless. I mean, how do you go about tokenization? So there has been a lot of interest in contactless, and a lot of it is a response to the consumers. And some of the statistics we are seeing here are very interesting. For the first time in the history of mankind, 65% of all retail banking transactions are happening digitally. Never happened before. Bank of America saw a 120% growth in the mobile deposits that it is so good at. Chase, for example, saw that mortgages, payments, and initiation and otherwise saw a high 3-digit increase in terms of what we do. So these statistics, I say, Ryan, only to tell the world, look, I mean, contactless and digital is here to stay. Our own research shows how a good 70% of consumers are not prepared to step inside a branch if a financial transaction has to be only consummated that way. So we see it on all sides, and basically Tim spoke about the API economy, and as a response to this, we implemented something called an OpenX because it is very important. So basically we have, in the 80s, we came up with these things called B2B and B2C and business to business, business to consumers. Now in an OpenX environment, it is everybody to everybody. And so we are, coming up with a new open economy, which is going to be worth in the trillions. And a lot of the payment products we are seeing hitting the market and the SPACs that are going and giving them a lot of equity power and liquidity power are mainly a response to the power of payments and part of the open economy that is going to be staggeringly high. So I think I agree with Salam and Tim when they say that the future is so bright for payments like never before.
Excellent. Yeah. Now, and when we're talking about payment modernization here, or kind of the modernization of ecosystems, I think one of the things a lot of organizations do is throw up that flag and kind of say, "Well, yeah, but what about legacy systems here?" So, for those individuals who are kind of throwing up that flag and saying, "Yes, I recognize I need to modernize my systems here, but do have a legacy system." Absalam, I want to start with you, and maybe we could give some examples of kind of quick wins, so to speak, of modernizing those legacy systems.
So quick wins in this environment would mean that we would need to release new products for the end customers without disturbing the IT and also the operations that are based on those legacy platforms. So this is really important. And as an example, the launch of numberless cards that have been quasi impossible to be released or to be issued in legacy platforms are able to be issued on our platform, on our PowerCard platform. And the idea here to be able to have those quick wins is the ability of these agile platforms to sit close to the legacy platforms in parallel to those platforms and able to release products and to issue products for the end customers without disturbing those. So the launch of numberless cards that was something that we have done many times over the world for our customers. That word quick wins. And also the mobile first kind of product has always been something easy to implement that are again in parallel. So those mobile first would be products that will enable the customer to be more involved by offering him more self-services, to offer him automatic enrollment to new services, sending customer alerts, involving him in the fraud and the risk management, and also using so many all the data that is able to be captured through those magic devices that they will have, that will enrich those platforms. So the idea here is to, on those quick wins that we have done also, is to issue them, to offer them in parallel to the legacy platforms, and avoiding disturbance on the IT and also on the operations.
Yeah, and closely following that, I mean, most of the quick wins we have had have been at an enterprise level. Obviously, we do a lot of things in payments, which is a embedded part of the enterprise. So very busy with the launch of 2 or 3 digital banks. I can't give the name, but how do you take banks that have been around for 200 years and then take that whole model, improve on that model, and make it a digital first clone? I mean, we have been very busy with that. Several initiatives in terms of, obviously, the world has seen the success of Apple Pay, Amazon Pay, and so on from a contactless perspective. And powering a lot of that are a lot of banks that are now trying to work in partnership with big tech to serve their customers better. So that would a second example of that. Payment servicing, where a lot of the folks that use the traditional CRM are now moving into conversational AI and what that entails. How do you make sure that the conversational AI works all the time and is much faster than the traditional ways of serving customers on CRM? And overall, how do you target operating models in terms of the future of payments, and how do we help banks and payments companies along the journey? We are also seeing a lot of fintechs respond very well. And this is not an engagement which Capgemini was involved in, but I want to call out Cash App and now how you can direct your payroll into the app, which I think is brilliant. I think a lot of banks are now seeing that, 10 years ago, 90% of all payments happened through banks. Today, if you add up what the banks are doing, it's only about 60%. So that shows you the power what the fintechs have had in kind of taking market share away from banks on the payments front. So very busy in working hand in hand with the banks and the fintechs in also fostering a lot more collaboration as we see the development of new ecosystems following the transformation.
I'm probably showing my age here, but back in the client server days, you saw the host get pushed into the background a bit, because if you were going to have a good Windows-like operation, then it had to operate in Windows, and they would integrate it to the host, and it would be a glaring, obvious switch transition for the customer to go from the Windows environment to some green screen solution. Now we have a much more significant change taking place in technology with APIs and the microarchitecture and Kubernetes and scalability and security. And we see the mainframe getting pushed even further into the background. It is still critical. The back end is a critical component of operations, but it has to be operating in the back end, not in the front end. And so there's a financial institution I work with today that just updated everything to become more modern. Yet when it goes to message them, it goes right to a green screen app. And you go, how on earth could they have forgotten to upgrade their entire customer experience instead of just tacking on their original mainframe email into this new, more modern infrastructure? So I guess my only point is, yes, mainframes are important, but doing it right is important too, so that the user experience is pleasurable, operates in the mobile environment, the web environment, and presents itself in a very modern way. And that bank is also taking advantage of the architecture that allows them to integrate to new third-party services quickly and easily, to get rid of those third-party services that are holding them back. Onboarding online is now critical. If you can't upgrade your processes to support that because you're tied to a mainframe, then you're going to be left in the past.
Tim makes some very good points there, Ryan. And one of the things we have called upon is that from a legacy modernization perspective, app modernization perspective, absolutely not everyone has the big bucks to spend, and not everyone is a JP Morgan. So how do you kind of respond to a lot of these banks that have high total cost of ownership, right? Obviously, part of it is like, how do you work with the likes of HPS and bring them the new ways of doing things, which reduces the total cost of ownership. But also we have come up with a model, what we call the legacy modernization model, where we look at every single app stack, we look at every single tech stack, and kind of make a decision using a lot of analysis and AI, which kind of says that, look, these 10 things can stay the way they are, but these 2 things have to go and get replaced by this other thing. And these 3 things can be modified to a better state. And this bunch of data can be ported to the cloud and mixed with this component of structured and unstructured data to enable more personalization. So these are the type of across the enterprise things that we are doing with payments at the center of everything. And a lot of people are on mainframes, and then look, it's easy to say, okay, you know what, mainframes is the old thing and how do you move? But a lot of the banks have been very successful at mainframe. So how do you enable the microservices architecture for them? Using APIs is a big component of what we are doing. And from a regulatory perspective also, like a lot of the folks who are moving to the cloud are very worried if the regulator comes in and asks for data on payments, are you able to bring it back to the current state and push it back to the old state? So working with IBM and Red Hat, we are we have what is called the IBM Cloud Pack that allows you to do, you're able to port it to the cloud, but you're able to go after historical data and bring it back when the regulators want it and push it back into the cloud. There is also a lot of folks with are under a lot of pressure because we see real-time payments growing, a lot of response to ISO 20002 and other regulations that are out there. And also, if you look at GDPR, the CCP, and all the new regulations that have hit them, how do you make sure you're able to put an umbrella of these regulatory concepts over a giant payment ecosystem and make sure that everyone moves to a better place in light of the new regulation? So I would say of everything out there, because sheerly of the volume of transactions, and payments constitutes the #1 area where a lot of the banks are paying a lot of attention. Some of the larger banks that have been doing this very well also realize suddenly they are in a commodity situation, because what is this giant payments thing they have created, which have cost them hundreds of millions of dollars to do? It is nothing more than a payment utility, which your fintech is able to, in some cases, do a better job of with a lot less spend. So how do you manage both these forces at work? And irrespective of the size and scale of payments and bank and non-banks, how do you help them move forward? Those are some of the things we are doing in the marketplace.
Yeah, and I certainly think all of that extremely interesting. But I think as we're kind of bringing up here, there's certainly a lot of factors that are at play that certainly is creating a lot of pressures on the payments ecosystem to kind of adopt and change and modernize here. So Absalam, I want to start with you because I'd like to get from your perspective, when you're looking at the entirety of the payments ecosystem, how do you feel that they've really kind of done in adopting to those pressures that have really been caused by the pandemic over the last year? And then also, as this adoption for digital payments continues to grow, how do you think the payments industry is going to keep up with that need?
So those pressures that our customers and globally the issuers, the acquirers have to cope with are issued or are generated by regulators, central banks, government, but also by the customer and the global market. So we saw a need of being able to react very quickly. And like Tim and Sankar were saying about the central bank that were pushing the banks to be more easy on penalties, more easy on interest. So how a modern platform, how an agile platform would be able to react quickly to those changes. And here we had to adapt. I give you sometimes very, very extreme examples where some of our customers decided to extend the expiry date because people were not able to get out of their homes, of their apartments to go and collect. their physical cards if it was not sent to their addresses. So many things that were really unpredictable, and how a decent platform, a modern platform, is able to cope with this, and in some cases in a very, very short time, and sometimes instantly. So this was very important to mention, and how our customers were able to do that. The second important thing that this pressure has generated, and we discussed it before, and this change of behavior, where a lot of card not present, a lot of contactless, and this not only generate volume, and we have to make sure that the channel that are transporting this data is able to do so, but this impacts also the operations in a bank. And the agility is not anymore on the platform, but really on how this technology enables business transformation to be cope with those changes. So it is really a whole change, a whole, I will not say pain, but really something that has to be dealt with in a very short period of time. So for me, this pandemic, or what this pandemic has generated, is very healthy, because not only technologies has to change, but also organizations has to adapt and has to be agile themselves, which at the end of the day would be for the benefit of the end customer.
Absolutely, and I think Absalam said it very well. Some of the other reasons why we are saying banks and fintechs and others embrace transformation is, number one, interestingly, now we have the crypto, right? I mean, so how do you make sure that we saw how PayPal and Square kind of enable the crypto even more. And obviously all of us were debating, is this a real thing or not? But suddenly it is getting more real, and you don't want to be left out in case it ends up, moving forward progressively. We saw this morning how some banks had come up and said that Bitcoin will not be more than $40,000. And so what will happen, and so on. So one thing we are seeing also is a lot of central banks around the world come up with their own stable coins, and banks like Citi, who arguably have more central banks as customers because of their large public sector presence, are helping these central banks launch those stable coins. So the payments industry, from a transformation perspective, needs to respond to that. So that is one example. Second, we spoke about real-time payments, of all the new regulations that are out there, and how a smaller fintech can actually tell a bank, hey, I want you to direct my information to this other fintech that is going to do my payments for free. So banks and non-banks need to have the agility to respond to such customer requests, right? And three, we are seeing, because of the low interest rate, continuing regime in terms of mortgage refinancing and the payments that it entails. So we have to do that, especially from an escrow account management perspective, and so on and so forth. Lastly, depending on the consumer segment we're dealing with, I mean, if you're looking at a digital native, I mean, they are not going to write checks, right? I mean, these guys are either Venmoing or, paying using other mechanisms. So when a bank looks at its payment strategy the next 10 years, 20 years, it clearly realizes that it has had an amazing past, but the future is going to be very different. So there are a lot of things that they have to do in doing the greatest good to the greatest number of their customers. And then we also see there are a lot of initiatives like Citi has done with Google Pay and others. Are banks going to be the Intel inside of a digital marketplace like Amazon? And if that is going to be their role, and if a lot of payments and financing are going to happen inside the hundreds of millions of small and medium enterprises and consumers combined on Amazon, then what is the kind of transformation that needs to happen to make sure those payments work? I will let Tim speak and then come back, but clearly we are seeing a big shift in terms of all these priorities for banks from a payments perspective.
Yes, Sankar. So if a financial institution looks at its operations, typically around 30% of its revenue is coming from payments. It's a department that you just can't let operate as is and think that that's going to be sufficient. And if you think about what are the first milestones that are going to hit you, PSD2, the networks 3D Secure are going to mandate eventually that the financial institutions, and in Europe, it's already been mandated, it will also be required by the networks, that issuers manage authentication in a way that slows down the fraud that's taking place in e-commerce. And that is going to be a mandate. It's going to have to be done, and it's going to have to be done soon. Now, a financial institution can address that by putting band-aids on their existing infrastructure. But if they don't take authentication as an entire function across their organization, then what they're going to have is a consumer gets one type of authentication when they use the card, a different type of authentication when they go to their online account, and a different authentication when they call up customer service. That's just crazy. What you're doing is pushing your customers away. So there's these mandates are going to require smart financial institutions to invest now and think not just about payments, but how payments are going to drive changes across their organization.
Absolutely. And one other thing we see is the significant growth in e-commerce traffic and online traffic, right? A good 70% growth, even in pandemic affected areas of Asia and so on. And even here in the US, a good 76% growth. And if you look at online ordering, significant takeoff in the high 70s as well, compared to what has happened in the pandemic. And I think a lot of folks are now realizing that it has been a good experience overall, right? It's a better use of time. I mean, my younger son refuses to eat at home all the time, and I have to find time to go and buy something for him. I mean, that's not a good use of time. So how do you enable these guys with DoorDash and Uber Eats and whatever else? And so now we are creating new payment types and new experiences that are here to stay. And unless the bank is ready to take care of this new demand, we are going to have a lot of challenges in terms of their future. So the question is, at the same time, there are a lot of fintechs with very good business models that need a home for this. So I think APIs are beginning to enable that. I have a feeling that in 10 years, the digital superiority of a lot of people, or even earlier, maybe in 5 years, today we say this bank or this fintech is digitally superior. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, working with the likes of an HPS, we are going to see that the digital superiority would level down. Remember the days when internet banking came along and everybody with a .com were supposed to be smarter, faster, more agile, transparent. And that is happening to digital wallets, contactless, and so on right now. I mean, obviously, every single bank is now buy now, pay later, which creates its own variation of how your payment has to respond to that. So I think we are going to see a lot of a lot of banks and fintechs move to the same level through partnership collaborations and APIs. And also quantum computing. And obviously we are seeing the days of cloud and how it can increase your compute power. And there's also quantum computing that is ahead of us. And while a quantum computer may be like 5 years away, there are a lot of science of quantum physics that you can use today to payments. A good example would be that in a voice channel, if a bank and a customer are having a conversation, you can wrap it around with some quantum to see if there is any distortion and if there are any phishing scams that happen and other scams and so on. So I think a lot of transformation is happening, Ryan, in payments, and it's very exciting to be part of this whole thing, in all honesty.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that we're diving into that payments transformation part of it here, because I think when we initially kind of asked the question, well, what's driving payments innovation or transformation? I really think that kind of, for some people, the default answer is, well, COVID-19. And I really look at that and kind of say, like, well, no, that's really kind of was the accelerator. There was transformation that was happening before COVID-19. And once it kind of goes away, transformation is going to continue to happen. So let's, for this question, put COVID-19 in its own separate bucket and kind of ignore that as best we possibly can here. And Absalom, let's start with you and kind of pull out what's really driving payments transformation here.
So if we have, from our perspective, the reasons why customers are coming to us or decide to work with us in their payment transformation is that, first of all, is that their existing platform can no longer evolve or cannot evolve at the right costs and timelines. So this is really important to not most, but a big part of our business is coming from customers that cannot evolve anymore or cannot make their platforms evolving. This lack of possibility to evolve, in fact, when it comes to business, it's a loss of opportunities, but sometimes it comes to regulations, and therefore it's just a stop of business. So the evolution is on the functionalities, on what we can offer, but also on the regulations. And regulations are really the worst thing that can happen, because one, it does not give you business, and if you don't do it, you just stop your business. The third point that is really important, and we mentioned about the PSD2, for example, there are new standards that are so deep that it's not just a little change. It's really, if it has not been thought from the very first day, it is totally impossible or costly, or it will just be done in such a way that is patched in every place, and the result at the end impacts both the end customer and also the operations. And at the end of the day, it is an issue. One of the example is the PSD2, and generally speaking, all the instant payment or anything that has to be instant. And today, we are talking about quantum computing. We are talking about, and you cannot have a batch mindset when we are in this type of architectures. When we talk about APIs, when we talk about all these things, everything has to be instant. And here again, there are some technologies, there are some platforms that are just not able to do it. The other point that is really important, and we have mentioned it many times during this session, is that we are seeing that there are many new players. So there is a granularity in the payment value chain, and therefore we need to have systems that are able to handle multiple players. So it means that we need to have, or we need to implement new business models fast and agile, and we'll be able to innovate and have really something totally new. And at the end, I think we have seen it many times, especially these last months. There is a lot of merger, of consolidations that are creating new dynamics, and again, new business models. So these are really the main drivers that should drive the road, or should indicate the road of a payment transformation.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that and say, and I hope this doesn't come across in a bad way. Look, there are a lot of extremely smart technologists that want to, make payments happen on the moon and so on, right? I mean, there's all these, but in order for, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think a lot of things will happen, but I think, and these smart technologists, and I'll give you a Robinhood as an example, right? Great platform, first mover, right? People are like, Robinhood, come on, their guys will be dead and gone, zero fees. Brought down the entire wealth management industry on its knees, right? But when they launched their own checking account and current account, they ran into some issues. So I think it is very important for the smartest to realize this, which is one, you need a very good platform like what HPS has, enables omni-channel, enables all-around communication, integration with Alipay, with WeChat, with M-Pesa if you have to. And there is a lot of countries that are not first movers, but definitely will move quickly and enable that. A good example is the entire opportunity for payments in the Middle East, for example. You need companies like Mercator that have seen this for a long time. And basically, you need that thought leadership in terms of making sure you don't get anything wrong. And you need execution partners and SIs like Capgemini. So basically, I think the world is all about growing digital, but there needs to be someone that backstops the knowledge of the last 100 years and has a bulletproof platform that is able to do that. And with those two, you're able to get to a better state in terms of your differentiated product and whatever else you want to do. Oftentimes, I find that smart technologists are really good, but because of the fact they don't consider this, their cost of launching a new product is often a lot higher because they just go to market and then find out that the regulators or someone else comes in and slap their wrists. And then the cost of going back and rebuilding is a lot different. So my request to everybody out there before you launch your new product is that we have a lot of scars to show, be it HPS Mercator or CAP, and we would like to share those with you so that you're able to launch your new payments platform and enable society and communities to transform a lot quicker.
You know, that discussion brings me to a particular market, prepaid market, where when it started out, there were about 40 prepaid processors, revenue was growing. That market was extremely hot. Consolidation started to occur. You saw smaller players that couldn't keep up with that payment platform requirement to support more and more use cases. Now, if you take a look at that same prepaid market, the most significant participants in that market are no longer prepaid players. They're disbursement players. They're integrated to ACH, to real-time payments. They're reaching out through APIs for new business partners. And so what was a consumer product, a prepaid consumer product with incentives, GPR, payroll, is now a disbursement platform and being adopted by many more organizations, some of them extremely large, as well as fintechs. Financial institutions today that are still thinking of this as, gee, it's consumer here, it's commercial over here, have got to realize that the competition is broadening those APIs and making it available and capable of being rapidly onboarded across a number of brand new use cases like Instacart and others. And if you want to continue to see your revenue grow in payments, you need to come to grips with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, we're all in this together, I feel. And, with several conversations we have had lately, we have taken Mercator in because it's, you need to have that depth of knowledge on what would work and not, especially those payments companies that are now trying to get a banking license. Man, that's a lot of work. If you don't start right, you are in trouble. And same with Abdul Salam and his team. They have always been there to help us, think through what it takes to design an omni-channel futuristic payment platform, and they have an amazing base case that is second to none.
Yeah, no, and I certainly think, talking about this is certainly very fantastic. But, I'm certainly have a feeling that in the audience, they're certainly saying, Absalam Zankar, Tim, I hear everything that you're saying, and I certainly agree with it. But there's a cost to innovation here. So I'm curious, and Absalam, let's start with you. Let's break down how firms can accelerate payments innovation while maintaining profitability in the long run.
So this is the equation to resolve, of course, and in any company, the profitability or the revenue is generated from a previous investment. So this is really important, and I think that profitability and investment should not be seen as two opposite things, but one generating the other. So this is really the first thing. In our case, in HPS, we spend or we invest, I think the right word would be we invest between 15, 16, 17% of our revenue in innovation and R&D, depending on the years. And it is important for a company like ours to make the balance between the functionalities investment and also the architecture investment. And we have seen in the market that some companies are investing in one or the other, but very few are investing in both. It means that they keep really in a high level in architecture, making sure that we use or that the platform uses the latest technologies to be able to cope with the latest standards of architecture, of security, of being able to handle the load, etc., etc., and at the same time offer what the real customers needs and what the markets needs. And this, in our case, our roadmap or our investment are investing in the technology, in the regulations, and this is really, really important to be ready when regulations are there, and at the end, the functionalities. And what is really important, and we think it's a real value to us, and we mentioned it today. Tim was mentioning about the PSD2 in Europe. So this is something that any experience, any new functionality, any regulation that we have been able to develop to capture in a market, we are retrofitting it in our single base platform. So we have one single stack software, and we retrofit any of the functionalities, any of the regulations to make sure that other markets, other customers can take benefit of it. So this is really important. And at the same time, while we are building, while we are enriching, while we are maturing our platform, we make sure that the modularity of it and the ability to do composable business is always there. So our magic sauce, or our secret sauce to make sure that this equation is resolved, is to make sure that we do invest in all those areas to make sure that we keep a consistency of our platform always.
Absolutely. And, I second that. I think cost and investment are kind of go together. But to answer your question, Ryan, step one, what are the things we can do from a revenue side? I think we cannot start with the cost. We have to start with the revenue and have a matching cost, right? I mean, even accounting works like that, right? You match the cost to revenue. So on the revenue side, I think payments firms have a lot to do. One, how do we take the data that we have over many years of existence and monetize that data better? It's a huge revenue add. And if you're able to mix and match the data in a certain way, it gives you an X factor that you can exploit in the market and go after those clients. And a lot of them are from a payments behavior perspective, right? I mean, what type of payments do you use? Is it real-time payments? Is it low value payment, high value payment? Is there a pipe you can use that is going to bring your costs down compared to individually processing these payments, and so on and so forth? So all of them are on the revenue side. Two, there's a lot of new audience that are out there which we are missing in payments. And then how do you take, working with the likes of Marketer HPS, how do you take the payments proposition to a new audience, right? And then those are the two things I would say on the revenue side. And also, if you have already created something, how do you move that to a payments as a service? So you create new revenue lines for yourself. So those are three things on the revenue side. On the cost side, we spoke about legacy modernization. We have come up with a very nice model that is able to, irrespective of the size of a payments company, we have something which is able to identify 20 to 25% savings upfront that you can redeploy in the future state of where you want to go. So, and I think we have to work hand in hand to make that happen.
We were working with a small bank under $500 million in assets under management, and they became aware of what was going on in payments and started to make some very shrewd investments in API platforms and to start to separate themselves from the core supplier they had, which was restricting how quickly they could innovate, to be able to build a platform that would enable innovation and enable them to provide these different payment mechanisms. And you look at many financial institutions are just frozen. They're looking at all the changes, they're looking at the revenue that comes from that payment platform, and they're frozen. And that is the wrong behavior. As we've seen during the pandemic, the ones who survive are the ones that can adapt. You need to be able to make the cost savings, to be able to get investment, to be able to move your company forward. That might require carving out some business unit that's not profitable anymore, or it might be, as you said, investing in some technology that saves money to invest in future business opportunities. But one thing we've all said through this entire session is it's changing. The world is changing. There are huge opportunities if you change with it, and it's probably going to eliminate your business if you don't make those changes. And there are companies to help. You can reach out and make those changes. I notice we have a list of questions here, Ryan. Should we move to the questions that have come in?
Yeah. So before we get to the questions, the one thing that I'd like to do is maybe perhaps we can start with Absalam, then go to Sankar, and then Tim, we can close with you. Perhaps we could kind of summarize everything that we've been talking about here today, because I think we certainly unpacked a lot of information. So Absalam, maybe if we could start with you, maybe kind of address some of the key takeaways that you would like for our audience to be able to pull from this conversation here today.
So I think that for me, the takeaways are composable business, open platforms, proper modularity that will enable transformation of the platforms, being able to focus on the most relevant part of the business, but also enable a business transformation that is a must, and we have witnessed it in the past year. Transformation really is a key issue, or is a fatal issue when it is not happening. I think Tim has mentioned it by saying that who was not able to adapt has just passed away in the past few months. So this is really important, that taking into account a technology that is able to enable a quick and fast and deep transformation.
I would say the following. Do not worry about the cloud and think it is less secure or so on and so forth. Please take it seriously. It will definitely find you the benefits you're looking for from reducing per cost of transaction and increasing compute power. And the three of us on the panel are happy to show you coming together how it is done. To basically make sure you're able to define your target operating model on what you want to be, because a lot of it is emanating from that, because it's easier to kind of look at all the new things that are happening. For example, you can say, oh, a firm just went IPO and their valuation is amazing and their payments are free. What do I do? I mean, how do you compete against free? But I would say that don't worry about that. I think there are ways in which everyone with a brand or an aspiring brand can mix their data, the way they process payments, and the platform, and take it to a better state from a revenue perspective and a cost perspective. And I offer myself to help in any way possible, working with the likes of HPS and Marketer, our partners.
Thank you. I love the fact that you bring up the data aspect, because that also is a huge component of this, and we haven't even talked about it and how it can be used to drive additional business. But having said that, financial institutions need to confront regulations which are demanding change, and that change goes across their departments. They have new payment types that are coming in, and if they want to protect that revenue that is about 30% of their total revenue, they have to start thinking about those new payment types. Technology changes. If they're not thinking cloud, microservices, architecture, and the like, then they're building in the past, not for the future. They're not taking care of, right? Today, houses and buildings don't use the old cement and wood of the past. They're using composites and new material, and we have to build our software using the new material that's available today. And all of that has to happen pretty quickly because of the way COVID has changed both business as well as consumer behavior. And so it's time to really reevaluate, think through what needs to be done, and get on with it.
Well, one of the things, Ryan, also to mention is that what we didn't cover today is how important is design thinking led processes and human-centered design things. One of the things we find, all three of us, with payment companies is that while they are trying to attempt at modernization, their app is designed for historical use. It is not the one preferred by digital natives. So unless you're able to have the feature functionality like an Uber or Amazon or Facebook, it is going to be very tough to survive in the new age. So design thinking led human-centered design and process design is extremely key for better payments transformation.
Excellent. And so I think we've got time to kind of sneak in one question here on Absalam. It's going to go to you. So all this being said, how do you see your go-to-market in the U.S.? And before you answer that, I just want to send a reminder to our audience here. For those of you who did ask a question during this panel conversation here, we will be able to follow up with you via email. But Absalam, if you could provide us the answer to this question, please.
Yeah. So until recently, our strategy to go to market was geographical proximity, and this has been done in the Middle East, in the Far East, in Europe, and in some of other parts of the world. And today we have developed and proven, and we have the tools and the processes to be able to work remotely to enter a new market. So for the US, with the help of our world-class partner, CAP Gemini, I think it's really an opportunity for us to get into this new market for us. with the help of such an established company, with all what we just said, with all what we learned this year, this is all an opportunity for us.
Excellent. Well, Absalam, Zakar, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time today for kind of really unpacking, kind of the lessons learned from 2020 and the pandemic and kind of breaking down payment modernization here. And we certainly look forward to doing it again. And again, just as a quick reminder, certainly feel free to reach out to any of these individuals with additional questions that you might have. And if you did ask a question during this panel conversation, we will make sure that we follow up with you via email. This now concludes this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.